The haunting smile. It began as an ordinary day in the quiet town of Millfield, where everyone knew everyone else. The townsfolk were close-knit, their lives intertwined in the gentle rhythm of routine. However, beneath this veneer of normalcy lurked a darkness that no one could have anticipated. The tale centers on Emma, a young woman who had recently moved back to Millfield after college. Emma was always cheerful, her radiant smile a source of comfort to those around her. But one day, her smile changed. It grew wider, unnatural, stretching beyond the bounds of her lips. Her eyes, once filled with warmth, now shimmered with a chilling intensity. It started subtly. Emma's friends noticed how she would stare at them a second too long, her smile frozen as if painted on. Conversations became uneasy, her laughter hollow, yet no one dared to confront her. They simply averted their eyes and hoped it was just their imagination. But the nightmares began. Friends and neighbors would wake in cold sweats, remembering Emma's twisted grin hovering over them in the dark. Sleep became elusive, and fear crept into the hearts of the town. One evening, Emma's childhood friend, Sarah, decided to visit her. The house was eerily quiet, filled with a suffocating stillness. Emma greeted her with that haunting smile, leading Sarah to a dimly lit living room. Family portraits adorned the walls, all faces scratched out, except for Emma's. In a trembling voice, Sarah asked, "Emma, are you okay?" Emma's smile widened, her eyes never blinking. "I've never been better," she replied, her voice carrying a strange echo. Sarah noticed something peculiar. Emma's shadow seemed to move independently, its mouth widening even further than Emma's own. The room grew colder, the walls seemingly pulsating with a life of their own. Panicking, Sarah stumbled out of the house, her heart pounding as she raced home. She tried to tell others, but no one believed her. Yet, in the following days, more people reported seeing Emma's face in their reflections, her smile widening as if savoring their fear. One by one, townsfolk began disappearing, their homes left untouched, but for a single photograph of Emma, her smile the last thing they saw. Those who remained spoke in whispers, the town's once vibrant spirit replaced by a chilling silence. Desperate for answers, Sarah scoured the town's history and uncovered a terrifying truth. Emma's great-grandmother, a woman shunned for practicing dark rituals, had been buried alive for her malevolent deeds. Before her death, she had cursed her bloodline, ensuring that one day her spirit would return, using a descendant as a vessel to spread her wrath. Realizing that Emma was merely a puppet for an ancient evil, Sarah knew she had to act. She gathered the remaining townspeople, and together they marched to the old cemetery where Emma's great-grandmother lay. The ground was disturbed, the earth fresh as if something had clawed its way out. As the group began their ritual to break the curse, Emma appeared, her smile wider than ever, her body contorting in unnatural ways. Her voice, twisted and layered, pleaded for release and mocked their attempts. But as dawn broke, the ritual concluded, and a blood-curdling scream tore through the air. Emma collapsed, her smile finally fading, replaced by an expression of sheer terror. Though Emma survived, she could never recall those dark days, nor could she remember why her friends and neighbors now kept their distance. The town of Millfield returned to its sleepy existence, but the memory of that haunting smile lingered in every shadow, every reflection, a chilling reminder that some evils never truly fade. In the years that followed, a new family moved into Emma's old house, and on quiet nights, if you listened closely, you could hear a faint laughter, followed by the unsettling creak of a smile, stretching far too wide. Months had passed since the nightmare in Millfield, but the town was far from at peace. Though Emma had been freed from whatever force had controlled her, the scars it left behind ran deep. Many of the missing people were never found, and those who remained lived in a quiet, fearful existence. But the worst part, the smile hadn't disappeared. It had only moved. Sarah, now haunted by what she had witnessed, tried to move on. She told herself the horror was over. Emma was safe, the ritual had worked, and the town could finally heal. But something in the air felt wrong. The nights were colder than usual, the streetlights flickered more often, and worst of all, the laughter had returned. It started in whispers, soft giggles heard in the dead of night, floating through the empty streets. At first, Sarah dismissed it as paranoia, but then others started hearing it too. The local shop owner claimed he heard it while closing up, and a young boy swore he saw a woman grinning at him from the woods near his house. But there was no one there. Then came the reflections. One evening, Sarah was brushing her hair in front of the mirror when she saw it. A fleeting glimpse of Emma's face in the glass, her smile wider than humanly possible. Sarah spun around, but no one was there. Her heart pounded as she slowly turned back to the mirror, dreading what she might see. Nothing. But just as relief washed over her, her reflection blinked, and she didn't. She stumbled backward, knocking over the lamp on her dresser. The room plunged into darkness, but the mirror still glowed faintly, as if something inside it was watching. The next morning, Sarah rushed to Emma's house. She needed answers. Emma looked different. Though she no longer carried the same eerie grin, her face was pale, her eyes sunken with exhaustion. She admitted to having strange dreams of standing in an endless void, surrounded by laughter, unable to move. And then just before waking, she would see it. "The smile," she whispered. "It's still here, Sarah." Determined to end this nightmare for good, Sarah and Emma visited the town historian, an old woman named Margaret, who had lived in Millfield her entire life. Margaret listened carefully before shaking her head gravely. "The ritual you performed, it didn't destroy the curse, it only severed it from Emma." She sighed, "But a curse that powerful doesn't just vanish, it finds another host." The realization hit them both at once. The laughter, the reflections, the feeling of being watched, it wasn't over. "Then who?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret hesitated before standing and motioning for them to follow. She led them to an old storage room in the back of her house, filled with yellowed books and dusty photographs. She flipped through a few pages before stopping at one. It was an old black and white photo of the town square, taken nearly 100 years ago. People were gathered for a festival, their faces joyful, except for one. In the center of the crowd stood a woman, her smile unnaturally wide, her eyes dark and hollow. She seemed to be looking directly at them, despite the photo being taken decades before they were even born. "That's her?" Margaret whispered. "The first one, the woman who started it all." Sarah felt her blood run cold. The woman in the photo was unfamiliar, but something about that twisted grin felt all too real. Emma's voice trembled. "What happened to her?" Margaret hesitated before replying. "They say she was buried alive, just like you discovered, but her spirit never left. It's always searching for a new face, a new smile." A cold wind rattled the windows, and for a brief moment, they all heard it. The laughter, distant yet deafening, echoing through the walls. Sarah turned to Emma, her pulse racing. "Then we have to stop it. For real this time." Margaret sighed, her expression grim. The only way to stop a curse like this, is to return it to where it began. Emma swallowed hard. You mean? Margaret nodded. We have to go back to the grave. The air in the room grew heavy, as if something unseen was listening. Outside, the streetlights flickered once, twice, then went out entirely. The smile was waiting. The graveyard loomed ahead, shrouded in fog, its silence heavier than the darkness itself. Sarah, Emma, and Margaret stood at the rusted gates, their breaths visible in the icy air. The town felt different tonight, empty, abandoned, as if the world itself had recoiled from what they were about to do. Margaret carried an old leather-bound book, its pages filled with forgotten rituals. Emma held a lantern, her hands trembling. And Sarah? She carried a shovel, knowing that before the night was over, they would have to unearth the past. As they stepped inside, the wind howled through the leafless trees, carrying with it the faintest echo of laughter. It was close now. This is where they buried her, Margaret whispered, pointing to an unmarked grave near the center of the cemetery. The woman in the photo, the first one. Emma hesitated. And the curse? You said it needed a new host. Margaret nodded gravely. It hasn't chosen yet. But if we don't stop it now, it will. Sarah took a deep breath, gripping the shovel tightly. The first strike of metal against dirt echoed unnaturally loud in the stillness. With each scoop of soil, a sense of dread grew stronger, pressing down on them like unseen hands. Then the shovel hit something solid. Wood. Emma's breathing grew rapid. Oh God, it's real. Margaret flipped through the book, muttering an incantation under her breath. The air thickened, charged with something unseen. Sarah hesitated before reaching down and prying open the brittle coffin lid. Inside lay the remains of a woman, her bones twisted, her skull frozen in a grotesque grin. But just as Sarah moved back, the bones shifted. The laughter returned, rising all around them. Shadows slithered between the trees, shifting, watching. The ritual now, Margaret shouted. Emma held the lantern over the open grave as Margaret began chanting in a language that felt ancient and wrong. The air swirled violently, and the shadows pressed closer. Then, the skeletal mouth moved. A voice, dry as death, rasped from the coffin. You smile too. Emma screamed as unseen hands grabbed her, pulling her toward the grave. Sarah lunged, grabbing her wrist just in time. But Emma's face was changing. Her lips curled unnaturally, her eyes darkened, her smile stretching too wide. The curse had found her again. Margaret, do something, Sarah cried. Margaret flipped through the book desperately before stopping on a passage. The curse binds itself to fear. Emma, listen to me. You have to fight it. Do not give in to the smile. Emma trembled violently, her expression flickering between horror and that unnatural grin. I can't. Sarah made a split-second decision. Grabbing the lantern, she smashed it over the coffin. Flames roared to life, consuming the cursed remains. A screech erupted from the grave, inhuman and furious. The laughter turned to wails as the fire swallowed the bones. The shadows recoiled, twisting and shrieking before dissolving into the night. Emma collapsed, gasping, her face normal again. The unnatural grin was gone. Silence. It was over, or so they thought. As the flames died down, Sarah noticed something half buried in the dirt beside the coffin. A blackened photograph. She picked it up, her hands shaking. It was the same photo Margaret had shown them earlier. The town square, the festival, the woman with the unnatural smile. But something was different now. The grinning woman was gone, and standing in her place, was Emma. Sarah's blood ran cold. She turned to Emma, who was staring blankly into the darkness, her lips twitching, and then she smiled. To be continued.